Why do we snack? Because we have nothing better to do? Well, people who snack on almonds have something better to do. Almonds are heart healthy and full of energy, with the crunch that keeps you in the game. California almonds. Crunch on.
This is the Best of Mike and Mike podcast on ESPNRadio.com. The Best of Mike and Mike.
Hey, it's Cole. Thanks for checking out the Best of the Mike and Mike podcast. Here's what we've got for you today. Jets' new coach, Cowboys keeping Garrett and Elway on Manning. That and into the game analysis with John Gruden. Colts' Coby Fleener prepares for the Pats. Greeny doesn't want Cinderella anymore. And NFL Network's Mike Mayock on where Jones and Mariota could go in the draft.
Mike and Mike.
Rex gets a pizza. LeBron is back, but not better than ever. And if you'd like to buy a basketball team in Brooklyn, one of them seems to be available. All that and a whole lot more, but we start with the coaching carousel. A couple of moves made yesterday. One of them, the Cowboys retaining Jason Garrett, and we'll get to that. The other, the Jets hiring their new head coach, Todd Bowles, right after they hire their new general manager, Mike Maccagnan. And so, of course, as soon as the Bowles news comes down, everyone is asking me my opinion on it. And the only answer I can give you is I'm going to be optimistic and hopeful. This seems to be a guy a lot of people were high on. He obviously did an outstanding job with the defense in Arizona. I was reading some quotes that Antonio Cromartie, who's a former Jet and played for Bowles in Arizona these last couple of years, gave to the New York Daily News, in which he was talking about how the players are going to love him. He's an extremely aggressive. You always think of Rex Ryan as having an aggressive attacking defense. Actually, Bowles teams blitz 1,000 times more than Rex or anybody. They blitz more than any other team in the National Football League.
And actually 16% more times than the Jets did over the last two seasons. The Cardinals did it the most. Bowles is going to come after you.
He's going to come after the quarterback. He's a former player, which I do like. I think that's going to command respect.
His career basically was the same as mine. I came in 85, got out in 93. He came in 86 and went out in 93. Played with the Redskins, so played against them, but we were both on defense, so we never went against one another. Played for the 49ers for a year as well. Most of his career was with Washington. He's coached at a lot of places, Jets, Browns, Cowboys, Dolphins, where he was the interim head coach for 3 games, Eagles as well. But I'm with you as far as you don't know. Dan Quinn's the hottest name out there. Dan Quinn's going to sign with someone after Seattle goes as far as they're going to go, and you're going to say the same thing. You don't know. As a head coach, you have no idea. Because now he's got to put a staff around him, does Todd Bowles, or any of these assistants that have never been head coaches, and then we kind of find out what their personality is, because we only see their personality on one side of the ball as a defensive coordinator. Now it changes when you become basically the CEO of the team.
That's correct. And so that's what I'm going to say here is a lot of people are saying the Jets, because they're offensively challenged and they need to develop a quarterback and needed to hire an offensive-minded head coach. I'm not one who buys into that. And I had this discussion with you about Rex and all the rest of it going wherever he was going. The head coach should not be exclusively focused on one side of the ball. In a perfect world, I don't even think he should be mostly focused on one side of the ball. He's got to be running everything. And you got to get the right people to run their departments, if you will. So from what I'm reading, he's going to hire Chan Gailey to be the offensive coordinator. Gailey obviously has been around a million years. He's been everywhere. He's been an offensive coordinator. He's been a head coach on both the pro and the college level. So I'm going to be optimistic. A Bowles in the hand is better than a Quinn in the whatever. I mean, I don't even know what I mean. You can't sit around and wait. Look, the Seahawks are going to the Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers can't even walk across the street. The Seahawks are going to go to the Super Bowl.
Certainly, I'm not going to say that definitively.
No, can I? But it's likely.
To your point,
you're waiting
yes.
3 weeks.
You're waiting a long time for Quinn, right?
And then you might not get him,
right?
So if that happens, the game I guess becomes musical chairs.
Right. I
always call it the coaching carousel, but in this case, I think it became a game of musical chairs where you don't want to be the one standing up and there's no seat for you.
You don't want to stand. Could not agree more. And listen, as far as the comparisons, why I said that about Rex and Buffalo is, and with Todd Bowles, because I'm with you. I'm with you on a new hire to say, well, they need help on the offensive side and they hired a defensive coach. Well, we don't know yet. My point with Rex was we did know. There was offenses with the Jets that weren't developed under his leadership. We have seen it. So that was my point about him going to Buffalo with an underdeveloped offense doing it again. With Todd Bowles, even though he's a defensive coach, I have no idea what he brings as an offensive, as a head coach, what he's going to bring to the offensive side of the ball. So we wait and see there.
Here's Adam Schefter.
In a perfect world, the Seattle Seahawks would have been eliminated for the Jets. They would have flown out to Seattle on Saturday night and tried to hire the Seahawks defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn. But the New York Jets did not feel comfortable waiting, especially when they considered Todd Bowles every bit as attractive a candidate as Dan Quinn. And so rather than waiting for Quinn, the Jets went ahead and made the move, getting Todd Bowles under a 4-year contract and getting a guy that they loved and felt comfortable with now. They make the deal with Bowles rather than wait for Quinn.
You know, if Dan Quinn was 1, Bowles was 1A. I mean, I think these two were like considered the two of the coordinators out there, the two guys that were going to go. And for Dan Quinn, it's the way the system works. He had 1 week where he could interview. 1 week off. That was the first with the wild card week where they had a bye and he could talk to teams then. And then now he can't until he's done. So you can say it's the system or not. Well, you know, whatever. In college, you have college guys coaching that are still going. Todd Herman, the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, continued to coach Ohio State knowing he was going to be the Houston head coach as soon as their season ended.
And they've done that as well with the college and the pro. Remember, Charlie Weiss was hired as the coach of Notre Dame before the Super Bowl.
Exactly right. But here it's tough. Here you get handcuffed. And Dan Quinn right now is handcuffed, and teams have to make that decision. Do I want to be one of the 1, 2, 3 teams that don't have a coach when Dan Quinn's done, and he can only go to one team, and then you're left like, we've wasted a lot of time. It's a tough situation.
Well, so if you look at it, the other thing that we heard was that the Falcons were trying to bring Todd Bowles in for another interview and maybe wouldn't have let him at the building. And so the Jets did, I think, what you're supposed to do, which is if they identified a guy they wanted, they brought him in, they beat Atlanta to the punch, and they didn't let him out of the building. Right. Or in this case, out of the restaurant. Seems they had dinner.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy with it. I think it feels like as good a move as there was to be made. The Jets didn't hire Rex Ryan because they had some genius in mind. Fire Rex Ryan. They fired Rex Ryan because it was time for a change, which I supported and agreed with. So this seems like it's worth a shot. They have put a lot of eggs in Charlie Casserly's basket. Now, we've known Charlie for 1,000 years. Charlie, when we first started Mike and Mike, Charlie was working at ESPN as an analyst, and he'd come on our show once a week. He used to sing the Good Morning song with us.
Yes, he did.
So I like Charlie, and look, his football acumen. I know Bill Belichick has had some nasty things to say about him, but overall, Charlie has been a good football guy for a very long time. He knows the ins and outs of it. He drafted Mario Williams instead of Reggie Bush, which looks like a pretty good pick now, when everyone made fun of him at the time. So overall, that's the guy that they hired. The GM they hired is a Charlie guy. Bowles is a Casserly guy. So I'm going to root for the best. I'm optimistic. I think this sounds like as good a move as there probably was out there to be made. They weren't getting Jim Harbaugh. They weren't getting Urban Meyer. They weren't getting anybody that was going to make you jump out of your seat and say this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. So this seems like about as good as it was going to get. I'm going to root for the best.
I'm with you. Of the candidates out there, a lot of them are assistant coaches who hadn't been head coaches. Again, Todd Bowles has, I know officially, he's been an interim head coach for 3 games, but it's tough to say he's got a lot of experience as a head coach. You just don't know. Unless you hire a guy that was a head coach, you just have no idea. So the optimism can be there because you're not sure. You hear great things about Bowles. You're going to love his defense. Listen, you had an attacking defense anyway with the Jets. You had a guy that the players loved in Rex Ryan, and they're going to love him in Buffalo. Todd Bowles, players are going to love him as well. And they're going to love his style of play, especially on the defensive side when you can get after it. And every team has their question. Rex went to a team that has a question on offense. Todd Bowles now takes over a team, and the GM in McCagnon as well, that has cap space, has a defense. They got to take care of some guys to keep them there, and has offensive issues and money to do some things. So right now, it's almost a little bit like Christmas. You got a new head coach. You're not sure what's in the box. You have a new GM. You're not sure what's in the box. And you know what you do have to go out Christmas shopping? You got a gold card. You got a lot of money. So you have money to make some moves, so there should be some optimism.
The problem is the one thing you really need is something money can't necessarily buy.
Yep.
And that is a quarterback.
Right.
And the question is, do you want to take one of the two that seem to be in this draft, or are you even going to be in a position to do that? You're probably going to have to trade up if you want to do it. I think by the time we get to the draft, the Jets draft 6. By the time we get to the draft, at 6, Winston will be long gone, and I think Mariota, too, will be gone. You'll have to move up to get one or the other of those guys. So who knows if they'll want to do that. Mike and Mike presented by Progressive Insurance. You can save hundreds on your car, business, or recreational vehicle insurance from a local independent agent. Go to Progressive.com today. Now that's Progressive. So let me just take a quick look here again at you want to call it the carousel of the musical chairs. There were a total of 7 openings since the season ended. Well, I'm not going to include the Cowboys. The Cowboys never came open.
No, never.
They signed Gary yesterday. That was never an opening. So let's not even count that one. Jets and Bills have filled their vacancies. Jets hiring Todd Bowles, Bills hiring Rex Ryan. The Bears, it looks like, are interested in John Fox. That seems to be a marriage that is
Right.
Everything I read.
And they do have their GM in place. There were two teams without the GM, the Jets, which took care of that, and Chicago had taken care of that.
With the young kid in Pace. And it'd
yeah.
be interesting to hire a very young GM and a very experienced veteran coach and John Fox, but that's all signs seem to be pointing in that direction with them. Then you have the Falcons, the 49ers, the Raiders, and the Broncos as vacancies. You got Dan Quinn, you got Adam Gase, you got a couple other guys. Doug Marrone is hanging around trying to get himself a job, still going to get his money.
Josh McDaniels
is one of those assistants. There are a bunch of those kind of guys. So we'll see. I mean, Dan Quinn can only wind up in one of those places. Maybe he winds up in Atlanta, and maybe that's the perfect marriage because you go to a place where they've got the quarterback in place.
Right.
Quinn goes in, as you said, to fix the defense.
Help the defense
and
out
see what
there.
happens.
We'll see. You're right because there's a few teams, and how long will these spots stay open? Oakland, Jack Del Rio, again, was going for a second interview. The players are absolutely wanting Sperano back. The players love this guy. We saw what happened to him in Miami when the owners there went for Harbaugh and really, kind of tossed him aside and then had to keep him and give him an extension. Players do like that guy an awful lot.
I'll be honest with you. I thought Tony Sperano was a pretty good head coach in Miami. I did.
I agree.
Tony Sperano was an absolutely awful offensive coordinator with the Jets. And it's interesting that his offensive coordinatorship with the Jets, and he happened to be there the year they brought in Tebow, so it was an abject disaster from top to bottom. But I think that has dimmed a little bit anyone's recollection of his head coaching time with Miami, where I thought he was a pretty good coach.
I agree with you.
He never had a quarterback down there. They won a bunch of games. They won a division with Chad. He turned a team that was 1-15 into a division champion with Chad Pennington at quarterback. And then, when he went on there, they had Chad Henne as their quarterback, and they weren't winning games, and people were blaming the coach. And my general feeling was that it was the fact that they didn't have a good quarterback. One way or another, I don't think Sperano's a bad head coach. So I don't think that would be a terrible thing to keep him there, but it doesn't sound like they're dying to do it.
It doesn't sound like I agree with you. It doesn't sound like I think they want to change there, but I do like him, and without a doubt, players really like him.
Jason Garrett, meanwhile, finally gets the job. Jason Garrett went through stretches where it felt like he was coaching for his job every week. Forget about every year.
Yep.
It felt like every single week Jason Garrett was on the verge of getting fired. Now he's got himself a long-term contract extension, so he is almost assured to become the second longest tenured head coach in Cowboys history. Jason Garrett, he will now certainly get to coach his 5th full season. He'll be the first Cowboys coach to do that since Jimmy Johnson from 89 to 93. The last Cowboys head coach to coach the team for more than 5 straight full seasons, and thus by definition the only one, was Tom Landry, who was at the helm for the first 29 years of the franchise's existence. So I know that I'm speaking as and part of our audience does remember Tom Landry.
Yeah.
One of the most epic names in the history of the sport with the hat and the class and everything else. But the point is, he was the Dallas Cowboys basically for 3 decades. Since then, there has been a never-ending revolving door of coaches. Jason Garrett at this point seems almost assured of becoming the longest tenured Cowboys coach since Landry.
And you're right. You had a guy that his seat always seemed perpetually warm, at times hot, always a little warm to make you kind of move.
There were times I thought it was potentially boiling. I thought it was at a simmer.
I think never lower than at least warm.
I agree.
But you know what? Now it's very cool at $6 million a year for the next 5 years. So it seems like the first time in a long time he, in his personally, can go home and take a deep breath and exhale. We'll see what goes on with their coaches. There was a lot of talk. Remember, Rod Marinelli, this defense was the worst in the league last year. Went up to 19th this year, so made a nice move up. There were thoughts he was going to go to Tampa Bay to be with Lovie Smith. He signs a 3-year deal. Now they're working on see what they're going to do with Scott Linehan and Bill Callahan on the offensive side to see if they can retain one or both of those guys because they're getting some interest as well.
John Elway met the media yesterday in Denver after the mutual parting of the ways with John Fox. And it became evident, and Elway didn't even hold back from acknowledging it, that his frustration seemed to be with the laissez-faire approach that his team had.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't think they had enough fire, they didn't have enough enthusiasm, and overall he did not think that John Fox was the right guy to lead them to the next level. Look, they put all their eggs in the basket of this season. And I'll ask you, Mike, now that we know that Peyton was more injured than we realized, do you think that's as simple an explanation as is necessary, or do you think the team underachieved beyond that? They did go 12-4.
They did.
They did win their division. They were the 2nd seed. They had the bye. If Peyton is healthy, who knows if they're still playing? I don't know if this is if Elway and Fox obviously were not the perfect match at this point, and that's fine. It's Elway's team. He can make the decision that he wants to. But I think if Peyton Manning's 100% healthy, I'm not sure we're having this conversation.
Listen, they went to the Super Bowl last year. They improved their defense this year. They certainly tried to get more of a running game, especially coming to the end of the year, as we know when Peyton was injured. So, yeah, it was you want to say underachieving, if that's the word you want to use? Yes, because they loaded up. They're doing exactly – John Elway's doing exactly what he should be doing with this window left with Peyton Manning. So now you go from the Super Bowl to losing your first playoff game. Yes, that for them, they can look at it no other way than underachieving, and they're trying to make, hey, I think Peyton's coming back, and they'll continue to try and do that.
I guess the real question now is the window closed? Here's John Elway on Peyton's future.
I told him, I'm going to stay in touch with him, but at 4 or 5 weeks we'll get back together and see where he is. And because, the career that he's had, what he's done not only for the NFL, but in the short time he's been here with the Denver Broncos, what he's meant to us is tremendous. And so, we'll continue to monitor that. But the bottom line is we want it back, and it's going to come down to, what Peyton wants to do.
Well, I do think he's going to go back. How much the thigh injury had to do with his game? Listen, only he knows. Only Peyton knows. We're not going to know. They're not going to come out and tell the truth about that until maybe Peyton writes a book 20 years from now, for all I know. I have no idea. Do I think he's coming back? Yes, I do think he's going to come back. I still think they're going to have a lot of weapons. Let's see what the money they have to take care of, what their money situation is as well, who they can have back, and then who they bring in as a coach. Obviously, John, if you hear from having to hire a coach but not sure what Peyton Manning's going to do, you wonder if there's going to be phone calls between the two, while that search is going on.
So you think he's going to come back? Chris Mortensen, not as sure.
I don't think Peyton does know. I mean, I think that he truly goes through a process, and obviously there's a physical part, but there's more than anything, and there's the heart part. And if I was guessing, and that's all I'm doing, I'd probably guess that he's not coming back, but I know this much. Nothing anybody says in the media, or I would say even family certainly would listen, nobody's going to persuade him to retire unless he feels it's time.
And let's just point out, as you know, but for those in the audience who don't know, Chris Mortensen is as plugged in as anybody to everything. He's especially close to the Mannings. So he knows Peyton about as well as anybody in the media knows Peyton. And if he's saying if he had to guess he's not coming back. Now, I think what becomes an interesting possibility, riddle me this, Batman.
Okay.
Is there any chance that Peyton Manning comes back, but not in Denver?
That I started thinking about that a little bit yesterday. It was interesting. I was reading a couple of articles about Peyton Manning hates change. Mm-hmm. Peyton Manning hates change, and they're changing the coach. Maybe he'll go to a different team. Let me ask you a question. Isn't going to a different team change?
Of course.
So I found that interesting that he would hate change of a new coaching staff, so he'll go to another team, which is complete change, which is even more change because now you're dealing with new players. Because we know what he does in the offseason. He gets with these guys and works with them, and he's done it with all these guys in Denver. So what's more change? Staying in Denver with a new coach or going to a new team completely? It's not even close. More change is going to a new team. So I kind of chuckle at that when we talk about him hating change, so maybe he'll go to a new team. That seems ridiculous to say because of the working relationship he has with the players on this team right now. So if he comes back, I do think he comes back as a Denver Bronco because I think that will be his – because where is he going to go of a contender? He's playing for one reason. Wants to play. Listen, you play, you love to play. Wants to win.
The best of Mike and Mike.
Mike and Mike.
The best of Mike and Mike.
The Indianapolis Colts, meanwhile, are getting set to go up to Foxborough, play the AFC Championship game this weekend, and it's our pleasure to welcome their terrific tight end, Coby Fleener, with us on the Subway Fresh Steak Hotline. Coby, Mike and Mike, how are you this morning?
I'm wonderful. How are you guys?
We are well. Pleasure to talk to you. And let's start with this. You were a college teammate of Andrew Luck's, and so you've known him obviously a very long time. And he said all the right things, as he always does, about beating Peyton Manning, whom he replaced in Indianapolis this past weekend in a playoff game. But down deep inside, again, knowing him as well as you do, what do you think that meant to him to win that game in particular against that opponent?
I'm sure it's a little bit of a relief, As anybody does, he just tries to kind of put his head down and work on the things that he can control. And he understands that the outside world and the media are going to make a big deal about the quarterback matchup in every game that we play, but specifically that one. So, I'm sure it's nice to get a win for him.
And as far as your team going to Denver, a lot of us, including both of us here, had picked Denver to win at home, thinking your team had been inconsistent to this point of the playoffs. How had you guys felt about your team? Were you guys playing your best ball going into Denver?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you would consider it our best ball. I agree that consistency hadn't been there as much as we would like, but I would say that we knew that if we practiced well that week and kind of went into Denver with the right attitude and the right mindset, that we definitely had a good shot.
Mike, how would you explain, Kobe, the inconsistency? It was a season filled with some startling ups for your team and then some fairly surprising downs. How do you explain some of the inconsistency of the Colts season?
Well, I would say it's kind of the nature of the NFL. Part of it's parity. The teams from 1 to 32, there's not a very big difference. I would say that sometimes it's just not your day. That says, you want to go hot, get hot in the playoffs, and I think we're starting to do that.
Speaking of your quarterback, Andrew Luck, I mean, is there anything you can do about this beard? Because I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, it's becoming difficult to look at. We love Andrew, and he's obviously one of the great players in the league today. But as one of his longest-standing friends, can you do anything about the beard? Because, frankly, it's becoming an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I've advised him against it in the past, and I don't think he's taking heed to my words. So I don't know what you want me to do.
I would say put like a beard grooming kit in his locker every day,
or a large razor.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to need something special to get that thing on his face.
The truth is, he genuinely is just too good to be true, right? I mean, when he was in college, he says all the right things, he does all the right things. You've known him a long time. We need something for the next time we have him on that's not so perfect. Give us something about Andrew Luck that is not so perfect.
Ooh, not so perfect. Besides his facial grooming, I don't know, man. He's a pretty special kid. There's no doubt about it.
So we'll just keep ripping him for his beard then.
Yeah. And his somewhat annoying perfection. So looking at the game, you guys played the Patriots this week. Now in 2 games against the Pats, you have been doing well. 13 catches, 218 yards. On the other side of the field is recognized as the best tight end in the game in Rob Gronkowski. First, your performance. How have you been able to have so much success against them personally? Your game.
Well, I think honestly, it's having guys like T.Y. Hilton, Reggie Wayne, Hakeem Nicks, Dante Moncrief all around. Dwayne Allen. That really take the attention off of me. And so when I'm fortunate enough to, have statistics like that, it's because they want to try to take away the other weapons that are on the field. And sometimes they do their best to try, and sometimes it works out for us.
How different is their defense now versus what it was a year ago? They made a lot of very high-profile additions, particularly in the defensive secondary. As you faced them earlier this year and as you watch the film getting set for them this week, how different is that defense from what it was a year ago?
Well, for as long as I can remember, the Patriots have had a stellar defense, and this year's no exception. Obviously, we're going to have our hands full, an impressive front, inside and out, and then obviously a great secondary. So there's no doubt it's going to be a challenge for us this week, and I think we'll be ready.
Hey, there was a lot made of the Patriots and their ineligible receiver lining up in Shane Vereen, making himself ineligible. Your coach has spoken with the league to kind of better understand the rule. Have you guys chatted about that, if not with the coach in the locker room, about that particular play and just how odd it was?
No, actually, I have yet to see that play. I've heard a little bit about it just in the media, but I'm sure the defense will look at it and try to do their best to be prepared for stuff like that. Honestly, I don't really know too much about it.
Mike and Kobe Fleener again. You went to Stanford. Not only did you graduate from Stanford, but you have a master's from Stanford in media studies, which I suppose would mean the appropriate last question would be, how do you feel this interview went? How do you think we did here?
I think you guys did a stellar job, although I would say that media studies in that sense is a little bit different than what I studied.
What is media studies in your sense?
It was more of a human-computer interaction type thing.
Human-computer interaction?
Human-computer interaction?
Yes, both of those, actually.
Wow. See, here's the thing. You're operating on a level so much higher than we are that I don't even understand what you're saying.
Listen, Greeny, I went to Notre Dame. I understand it. You went to Northwestern. We are.
What has been your human-computer interaction experience?
I'm interacting with a computer right now, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell he's saying.
Golic's computer interaction basically consists of Google what Kobe Fleener just said. Kobe, we got to let you run. Thank you very much. Good luck this weekend.
All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Mike and Mike.
Our pleasure to have you with us here. I want to start with something, Mike, because I want to ask you a fundamental question.
A fundamental question.
About sports. And I want to ask it to everyone this morning. Because there's something that I may have to finally come to the conclusion that if I'm the only person who thinks something, then maybe I'm the one who's wrong. You know,
we're not going to get there when it'll be appreciated when you're dead and gone.
Look, no. Well, I've said many times, I am like most geniuses. I will not be fully appreciated until after my time. But this is one that even I may have to finally give up on.
Okay.
So I'm reading a story here that was sent to us, and it's from Bloomberg, the financial news site, about college football's first playoff instituted after a generation of pleas for its creation was so successful that it has already led to calls for expansion. It talked about the enormous television rating of the Thursday games and of the other night's game, and the thing was a success even beyond expectations.
Beyond what I even thought was going to be.
I thought the expectations were through the roof.
Yes.
And now I think that it has been a success even beyond that. So that part of it is I'm not surprised, but it is noticeable or notable. And now we see that they're talking about, well, certainly there's more money out there. Here's a quote from sports consultant Bill Sutton. They didn't leave any money on the table, but they're going to need a bigger table. There's more money out there. Expansion's got to be on the horizon. So they're talking about now, because there's so much money involved, expanding the thing to get into 8 teams. So you know my feeling. I've been against that from the start. And let's put aside the discussion about how much money is being made and the players aren't getting any of it. And if they're going to get even more money, well, that's not even what I'm talking about today. What I'm asking you today is the following. I am of the opinion that the one thing that makes college football great, this is just as a sports fan, is that I believe it produces the truest champion of any of the sports that we follow closely. Because you go through the regular season, you pick out the very, very, very best teams, and in the previous system, you just let the 2 best ones play it off. Right. In this case, you let the 4 best ones play it off. So you're talking about really the best team. There's no fluke involved. There's nothing flukish about this. Ohio State is not a fluky champion, regardless of what happened, because if they were one of the 4 best teams to begin with, they absolutely deserve a chance to play for a championship. To me, that's not going too far. College basketball can provide a fluky champion all the time.
Yes, it can.
It's a one-game tournament. The 22nd best team in the country can win a championship. Pro football provides somewhat fluky champions. Right? People sometimes talk with great joy about these teams that were 9 and 7 and wind up, getting hot and winning a title.
The Giants. That could be the greatest story because you beat a team that was 18-0 in the New England Patriots.
Right. The Giants, the Packers of a couple of years before, the Steelers did it one year. We've seen it happen many times.
Right.
Am I the last person alive who doesn't think that's good for a sport? I think that crowning a true champion, that having some validity to what the regular season was, and then having the champion legitimately be the best team, which is one of the things I appreciate the most about the NBA, because you play a 7-game series, you almost always get the best team or one of the 2 best teams wins the championship. You very rarely have a team, barring someone that lost an important player to injury for a bulk of time, you very rarely get a 44-win team winning a championship, right? You're going to get a great team winning a title, and I like that. If the Carolina Panthers, who went 7-8-1 this year, got red hot in the playoffs, which they kind of did. They ran into a buzzsaw in Seattle, but they got kind of hot. If they had gone on and won a championship, would you have considered that a fabulous thing? Would you have said, oh, what a great day this is for football? This just goes to show you anything can happen. Because I would have considered it a horrible thing for football. I would have said, you just rendered your entire regular season completely meaningless. But what I have to do is come to terms with the fact that I can't seem to find anyone who agrees with me. And if everyone disagrees with me, then maybe I'm wrong. So I'm going to come at this morning with an open mind, and I'm going to ask you the question. If you start watering down your regular season to increase your postseason, and you get what some would have to describe as a fluky champion. I mean, if who was 8 in the final rankings this year at the end of the season in college football? Was it Michigan State or someone like that? I forget who it was. Whoever was 8. If that team had wound up winning, in your opinion, would that have diminished anything? If when a team goes 8-7-1 and wins the Super Bowl, does that diminish anything?
I mean, there's a difference of 7-8-1 and then winning the Super Bowl and a college team with 2 losses. I guess it's relative to the situation. If it's an 8th seed team that has 2 losses and everybody else, say for Florida State's undefeated and everybody else has 1 loss, it's less flukish than, I agree with you, a 7-8-1 team winning the Super Bowl, which you would say is a rarity.
It's never happened. But it could happen.
But close to happening when you have a 9-7 team that's doing it.
Yeah.
As opposed to 13-3 and 14-2 teams that don't. So I get it. It's certainly way more rare for the 7-8-1 team. Well, it hasn't happened, as you just said. But I think it's less fluky if an 8th seed, Michigan State or whatever. I'm just saying that name because
Michigan State was 8.
So a 2 loss would it? Yeah,
Michigan State played Oregon and lost.
Right.
They played Ohio State and lost. Then they get into a new 8-team playoff and win a bunch of games and win a championship. Is that to me, that's not as satisfying a conclusion and as legitimate, for lack of a better word, a way of putting it, as legitimate a champion as what you get this way. And I don't like it as a sports fan. Now, again, that's just me. And I'm starting to think it's really just me because I can't find anyone who agrees with me. So if I'm wrong, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong and I'll rethink it. I want to hear from you this morning. And by you, I mean everyone listening.
Here's what I say. When you hear John Calipari talk about his Kentucky team, I heard him after they blew out Missouri after a couple of close games with Texas A&M and an overtime game with Ole Miss, telling his team, I don't care if we lose now. It doesn't matter. I don't care if we lose now. It doesn't matter. Just play well to be ready for the end of the season, which certainly gives you the thought, wow, what does the regular season mean when we're all hoping this team makes a run at the undefeated, Indiana Hoosiers from, the mid-'70s to try and do that. Well, in football, think about that. And, again, we keep using Michigan State. Does it look bad if they had to come back through and play again the teams that beat them? Because that's what may have happened. Because both the teams that beat them would have been in it this year, correct?
Yeah.
In Oregon. So what
they were the one team that played both teams, and they lost to both.
So if they got another shot at one of them and beat them at the right time in the playoffs, is that bad?
I think so. Yes, to me it's bad. I think it's very bad. I didn't like it when Alabama and LSU had a rematch in the championship game some years ago. Now, I got it. If you played out an entire season and those were deemed to be the 2 best teams, I get it. But when you're number 8, they lost. I forget exactly what the final scores were, but they got blown out at home by Ohio State.
And they were winning for a bit against Oregon.
In the second half, Oregon ran away and hit.
Oregon took it to them.
So now, all right, we got hot at the end and we won. Here's what I'll say about the college basketball tournament. All right, the NCAA tournament, March Madness. It's kind of right around the corner now. March Madness is one of the best events we have in the country. It's the worst way to pick a champion I could ever possibly imagine, okay? I don't like that they named the winner of that the national champion. They've won a tournament. If you win that tournament, you've won a tournament. To call that team the national champion is insane. You got a team that could be one of not 40, because you have however many automatic bids there are. The 28th best team in the country could wind up winning that thing because they get hot at the right time. You're playing a never-ending series of one-game playoffs, and you win a championship. Billy Donovan, one year that they won it in Florida, said if you started the whole thing and played it over again, you'd have a different winner. That's a pretty unsatisfying way to win to me, or a way to settle a championship.
Here's what I'll say. What was the big debate at the end of this? Should a TCU and or a Baylor, before Baylor lost to Michigan State, let's go to the end of the rankings. Was Baylor deserving of being in? Was TCU deserving of being in? So now you're looking at 6 teams if you include those teams. Here's my thought on it. I look at it, I'll go the other way and say, I would rather take the chance to include those teams who I think could have a legitimate shot to win, to take the chance of what you may not like of a Michigan State losing to those 2 teams who are in it and then possibly beating them the second time through. I would take the chance of including a Baylor and a TCU, and along with it you would get a 7 Mississippi State and an 8 Michigan State.
See, let me stop you right there. Mississippi State played 2 big games all year long, right? I thought they had a really good team. They had a really good season. I apologize in advance to our friends in Mississippi for what I'm about to say. But they played 2 big games the whole year long, and they lost them both.
Okay.
So that team should play for a championship. They could be the champs. They played 2 games all year long that mattered, lost them both. So I don't understand. Now we're saying, oh, well, but they're the champs. Have them standing there holding up the trophy at the end. I mean, the logic in my mind says that's not a good way to pick a champion.
The logic also says that if the matchups would be Alabama against Michigan State, Oregon against Mississippi State, those teams could certainly win.
Right, because any team can win 1 game. Virginia Tech beat Ohio State. I know that it was early, but whatever.
Right.
No one is arguing that if TCU had gotten into this playoff, they might have won the whole thing. If you played the playoff again, you might get a different result, right? If you played the playoff again, if we just pretend this never happened, or even if it had happened, if 2 weeks from now, Florida State played Oregon again, and Alabama played Ohio State again, you might get a different result. There's a randomness to a playoff scenario.
Right.
So I like the idea that the only teams that have a chance to win a championship are legitimately great teams, legitimately worthy of being the champion. So I have zero argument with the way this played out. Zero.
So all you would be concerned is what if Mississippi State or Michigan State won? Because any of the other 6 you'd have no problem with.
Well, I guess
TCU, Baylor, with 1 loss.
Let's take it out of the spectrum of college football. When a baseball is Gruden ready to go? By the way, I don't want to take up all of his time because we can talk about this all morning long. Because this is a much bigger picture topic. I get it, but it's something that just is sticking in my craw to some degree. Because I feel like what I'm saying is logical, and maybe, like many people, I feel like if it makes sense to me, it should make sense to everyone. But since it doesn't seem to make sense to anyone else, maybe I'm the one who's wrong here.
Mike and Mike.
As a lifelong football guy yourself, can you put into perspective what Urban Meyer accomplished this year, losing his quarterback before the season began, losing his next quarterback right as the season was ending, winning 3 straight must-win games with a guy who had otherwise never started a game, lost a player during the season as well in tragic fashion, just all the things that this team accomplished this year. How would you put it into perspective what the team accomplished and what the coach did?
I think it's as good a coaching job as I've ever seen done in my lifetime. I mean, picture the 4 teams that are left in the NFL tournament, the Patriots, the Seahawks, the Packers. Picture them losing their starting quarterback and then losing their backup quarterback and going with their third-string quarterback and going to the Super Bowl and winning it. I think that puts it into perspective. This is one of the greatest coaching jobs I've ever seen, and I would say it is the best I've ever seen.
I think maybe the thing that can go above and beyond that, John, is now Urban Meyer meeting with those 3 quarterbacks and trying to get them all to come back to school. That could be his greatest accomplishment as a coach. What's the sell job there to get all 3 to come back?
I don't know what. I wish I had that problem, Mike. I do think that Urban Meyer has to really look hard at the kid that finished the season. He was magnificent against Wisconsin, Alabama, Oregon, and his size, speed factor, and his cannon is hard to duplicate. So I don't know what he's going to do. I do know this. He will go on the road and recruit a couple more guys. He might be the best recruiter to ever coach college football, if you ask me.
Yeah, the quarterback you're talking about is Cardale Jones, and because of the logjam at Ohio State, and because of his age and his experience and everything else, there is a possibility he could make the decision to go pro. He hasn't until tomorrow to decide that. I don't know what the expectation is, John, but if indeed he does make that decision, how in the world are NFL teams and NFL talent evaluators going to make a decision on whether or not to roll the dice on a kid with his obvious talent who has played a combined total of 3 college games?
I can't imagine him coming out after 3 games. I really can't. But if he did, there are going to be a number of scouts in Columbus and following him around wherever he goes, trying to get as much information as possible. The measurables will say he's a top talent. And his production in 3 games and against top competition says perhaps he is as good as any prospect coming out. But he's green. He needs to be seasoned some more. I'm sure of that. This is going to be very interesting to see what happens to Braxton Miller, what happens to all of these quarterbacks at Ohio State. But knowing Urban Meyer, he will have it solved quickly.
All right, Mike and John Gruden. Before we get onto the field with the championship games, we also have the coaching decisions that are being made, and the Jets hire a coach in Todd Bowles. Now, once upon a time, John, you were exactly what he is. You were a hot coordinator, and someone decided to take a chance on you, and it obviously worked out very well. When you're looking at a guy who's been a successful coordinator but hasn't really ever been a head coach, and Bowles was for three interim games, but that hardly counts. What qualities are you looking? We all understand that it's one thing to be a coordinator, it's another thing to be running the show. So what qualities do you think you would be looking for in someone to make the decision that, okay, they're ready to take that successful job as a coordinator and springboard it to being a successful head coach?
Well, Al Davis told me a long time ago, sometimes you just have to go with your gut feeling. And I'm sure whoever interviewed Todd Bowles was impressed. They felt he had the charisma. He had some of the factors that they're looking for. But I want to find out what kind of assistant coaches he can accumulate. That's the trick. He can't bring his entire coaching staff that he worked with at Arizona with him to the Jets. And all the coaches that he wants to hire, he won't be able to acquire either. Who's going to run the offense? Who's going to run the offensive line? It's very difficult to accumulate a coaching staff, number one. But I do think they know what they have. They have a man with a very vast football background on defense. I'm sure they feel comfortable that he can work with the front office and accumulating talent, but he's got to find a staff, and that's hard to do for any new coach.
And then he has to work with management. Mike Maccagnan is the new GM, was the director of scouting for the Texans. The commonality is Charlie Castlery, who helped with this situation. Bowles and Maccagnan don't have the history together. So what is Todd Bowles? What's that first conversation like with new coach and new GM? What would your conversation be like?
Well, I think first you want to look at your roster. You want to look at the players that you have the rights to on the Jets. And then you want to obviously see what players are free agents. But the first thing you do is you study your film. You study your players, your personnel. And then you have to visit with your coaches that are still under contract, because there are quality coaches that the Jets, I'm sure, still have rights to. But you have to deal with your personnel first, and then you have to go from there in terms of hiring coaches that can best equip the Jets with where they need to go.
Mike and John Gruden. All right, let's go on the field here and get to these games. Aaron Rodgers, obviously not nearly up to 100% with his mobility and everything else with that calf, still able to gut out a win with a brilliant second-half performance against the Cowboys, who put almost no pressure on him in that second half. We all understand that isn't going to be the case in Seattle. So what are your expectations for what Rodgers will have to do to be successful against the Legion of Boom?
Well, going back and watching Green Bay play Seattle in the opening game, they're going to have to throw the ball at Richard Sherman. They avoided him every down in the opening game of the season. So they're going to have to rely on Rodgers' pinpoint accuracy to throw the ball against any of these Seattle defenders. But I do like what Green Bay did in that second half. They went to that 0-1-4 personnel, whatever they call it, no backs, one tight end, and four receivers. They used Randall Cobb as a running back. They created some real matchup problems. I look for Green Bay to spread out Seattle and try to work against their second, third, and fourth corner and safeties in the passing game.
You know, one of the things we just kind of nonchalantly say is, a guy like Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, Drew Brees, they're not going to, and with the injury, not going to practice this week. That's all right. He doesn't need practice. How true is that? Do they really not need it at all, or do they need to do something?
No, I think they need practice. Now, there's some players that can get away with not practicing, perhaps more than others. But you're on a football team. You need your quarterback in the huddle, calling the plays, making the hand signals, working through the game plan. You got to have your quarterback, and practice is critical in pro football. Every week you have different blitzes, different stunts, different disguises that you need to see and rehearse. If we eliminate practice, I don't think the performance is nearly going to be as good.
Mike and Mike, Monday Night Football's John Gruden. I remember a year ago when the Colts were going to New England in a playoff game, you were on with us, and you and I both thought the Colts had a really good chance to win that game, and they didn't, and it wasn't all that close. It feels as though in recent years it's been a bad matchup for Indy against the Patriots. Where do you see that, and how, if they're going to turn it around, do they do it? How do the Colts go in there and turn that around and win a game on the road this Sunday?
Well, last year they turned it over a couple times early in the game. They fell way behind. You can't do that in a game of this magnitude. I really believe in Andrew Luck's ability to control a game with his scrambling and his decision-making and his arm. I am concerned about the Patriots' pass defense from an underneath standpoint. I don't think they have a lot of safeties and linebackers that can cover underneath against the tight ends, Vereen, the empty backfield formations that New England uses. I believe this game's going to be a shootout. I picked New England just because of Tom Brady, his experience, he and Bill Belichick at home, but it's going to be a great ball game.
It's John Gruden again. We're all looking forward to this weekend, and then we will see you in Phoenix for the Super Bowl. Thank you, John.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John Gruden, every week with us here. Mike and Mike, presented by Progressive Insurance. He is on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline.
You know what's interesting? We talk about these games, and we'll talk about the quarterback, certainly, because that's the most important position out there. You know, when these two teams, both these matchups were regular season matchups for Green Bay and Seattle, and both blowouts. Seattle won. Seattle in that game ran for 207 yards. And in New England's blowout of the Colts, New England ran for 246 yards. So it was big rushing attacks by both the winning teams. That's a game that Jonas Gray had the 199 or 200 yards. He had the big game there. So they were two big rushing attacks in the regular season win. So we'll see if we do get shootouts or not in these games, but they were both these games, first games during the regular season, were controlled by the run.
The best of Mike and Mike.
Mike and Mike.
Our buddy Mike Mayock joins us from NFL Network on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline, does the games, and, of course, does a lot of draft analysis for them, and that's where we will put all of his expertise to work this morning. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing pretty good, and I love the Legler stuff because he's another Philly guy.
Yeah. There you go. Absolutely, right. Yeah. He put out the word. If there's a 6'4" kid looking to play AAU, he's got a team for him,
He actually said 6'8". He'd like him 6'8", yeah.
One way or the other. Who wouldn't? And, Mike, a bunch of different things we wanted to get to with you this morning. We'll look ahead to the games this weekend, but from the point of assessing players, you know, all this conversation about Cardale Jones possibly going pro at this point came up yesterday, and he has until tomorrow to decide. Reading the tea leaves, it feels like it's leaning towards he's not going to do it. But in the event he were to do it, as one who has made your living analyzing this stuff for years, can you give us a sense of how you would go about, and how, more importantly, how NFL teams would go about doing a grade, doing an analysis of a player who has played a combined total of 3 college games?
It's a good question and a really hard question. I'm at the East-West game with the entire NFL. So what we're doing here this week in Tampa is evaluating all these college players. So I was at practice yesterday afternoon and talked to several really good evaluators about that, and the consensus seemed to be we're kind of in uncharted territories, and everybody hoped that the kid would come back for another year because a 3-game evaluation on anybody is unfair either way. So I think the NFL is kind of hoping the kid goes back in. I look at it as it's the kid's decision. He's got all the physical traits, but there's a reason, and this is the other comment I heard yesterday. There's a reason that the kid was the third-string quarterback at Ohio State. What was that reason? And the minute he declares, you know, we're going to dig into everything. And obviously he's a physically gifted kid, and it's going to come down to whether or not personally he says, well, I have a little baby and I have some financial issues and I don't care where I go in the draft, I just need to go. Or does he say, I'm going to go back and compete and try to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State and become the guy next year? And that's a personal decision for the kid.
Right. And then, to me, the interesting part of it becomes this. And, Golic, I'll start by asking you this, both of you who have just been in and around the National Football League forever. You know, in basketball, they draft based on potential. We hear that all the time. They draft someone based upon what they think they can eventually become. In football, in part because of rules and other reasons, they just don't do that. Could you see a team doing that, just looking at the potential and making a basketball-esque kind of move and saying, I see the ability for him to be great, and going up and using a high pick on him?
No, not a high pick.
I don't mean the 5th pick in the draft, but maybe a second-round pick.
No, and to me, that's the difference. Mike, I'll go to you after this, but in basketball, there's only 2 rounds.
Right.
In football, there's 7. I could see someone taking a fly. He may go higher than people think because teams might think, well, what is this team going to grab him? Maybe I need to grab him first. Because if you eventually think this guy could be a higher draft pick and you can get him in the 4th or 5th round, it would be a steal for you at this point to do. So I don't think he should declare. The kid doesn't think he's ready for it, but and I agree with Mike, and we talked about it the other day, is if he's in a situation where he needs to go now, then so be it, go. But Mike, I would think someone would take a flyer on him, but I don't believe it would be a second-round flyer.
No, the NFL is different than the NBA as far as how they value their draft picks, and there's 53 roster spots, not 12, and 7 rounds, not 2, and does the NFL draft on projections, on potential? Sure it does, all the time. And I would make the case that that's where they typically get hurt and make the most mistakes, is when they're going off of potential. The one-year wonder at wide receiver, very few of those guys ever pan out into anything. But would the kid get drafted? I think somewhere, but I think I'd be hard-pressed for anybody to say he'd go in the first 100 picks.
Mike and Mike Mayock, NFL Network. And the next guy in the discussion is Marcus Mariota, who has had better nights than the one that he had on Monday night in the championship game. And all that does is bring up all of the questions about him. Our buddy McShay, whom you know well, obviously said the only question mark about him is the single most important thing about an NFL quarterback, and that is his ability to just go back in the pocket and fling it. So as you begin the process of evaluating Marcus Mariota leading up towards the draft, what are your thoughts?
It's really intriguing because I think the whole Mariota-Winston thing are contraries. They're opposites. For Mariota, he checks off every box off the field and intangibles. Hardworking. He'll be the first kid in the building every day. He'll stay till whenever he needs to stay at night. He checks off all the physical traits: arm strength, athleticism, feet, speed, everything. So he's got all those things, but I've only done 3 of his games so far, but when I look at my notes, the 2 issues I have with him on the negative side are, 1, lack of consistent accuracy, which is a big deal for me, and number 2, inconsistent pocket awareness. So I would agree with Todd on that one. And with the proliferation, here's the issue, guys. You can't knock a kid for things he's not asked to do in college. And in the college spread offense, they're not asked to be pocket-aware quarterbacks. So then it becomes a projection. And his conversation is completely opposite of Jameis Winston. And it's really intriguing.
I completely agree with you. And I think those are 2 of the more important boxes to check, is the accuracy and your pocket awareness. So then it comes down to the question, is a team, because I'm with you, and Bill Parcells has said it many times, is you can only take what the college gives you, the kind of the quarterbacks they give you, and this is the system they run. So now it's, do you think he can develop that when you know Jameis Winston is doing that? So in your mind at this point, and we know things can change, would there be any doubt that Winston would go number 1?
Yeah, I still think there's a huge doubt, especially in today's NFL. I mean, last year we had the conversation about Johnny Manziel. And I'm going to be sick to death of talking about Jameis Winston and off the field by May 1st. Trust me. And so when you look at Jameis Winston, you can see anticipation. He trusts receivers. He throws to a spot. He's in the pocket. He slides and moves. He gets smacked in the face and makes a throw. He has inconsistent accuracy. Okay? But the bigger thing with him, because he's going to check off all the physical traits. He's got all the physical traits, and you can see what you want on the film. But the question's going to be, if you draft him number 1 overall or number 2 or 3 or whatever, do you want this kid who's had all these off-the-field issues to be the face of your franchise? And that's a big deal, especially given what's happened in the NFL in this last year and whether or not owners will start to get more involved with some of these high-level draft picks.
And we are in agreement, I think, on all of these matters. Mike and Mike, presented by Progressive Insurance. Mike Mayock from NFL Network is with us on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Let's look at the games this weekend. Aaron Rodgers was unbelievable on a bad leg against Dallas last week. Now he goes into the toughest building in the league to play in against the best defense in the league. What do you expect?
I'm so intrigued by Seattle. We haven't had a repeat since New England in the early 2000s. Until Seattle won last week, we haven't even had a Super Bowl defending champion win a playoff game in the last 7 or 8 years. So I think in that building, with that defense, the way they run the ball and play great defense, I'd be hard-pressed to think that as great as Aaron Rodgers is, they can come out of there with a win.
And then how about the Andrew Luck, and certainly trouble with the Colts, and Luck in his record against Tom Brady, though, everybody does, maybe except for Baltimore, going to New England, the chances for the Colts.
Yeah, Baltimore's really interesting, aren't they? They have no fear of that at all. I find that intriguing also. But as great as Andrew Luck is as a young man in his career, I don't think he's got the complement around him, especially up front with that offensive line. I don't think they're ready for this win. I give them a ton of credit for taking a step forward, but I really think it's New England.
And thoughts on Peyton Manning and how the season ended. We know how the last few weeks went. Now we hear he played a lot of that with a torn quad. The coaching and coaching staff is gone. Your thoughts on how his season ended and if you believe he'll come back?
Yeah, I feel, knowing Peyton fairly well, working the Manning Passing Academy every summer, I don't know where he was from an injury perspective, so I hesitate to say anything, but just from watching the game on television and rating the performance, obviously it was not a Peyton Manning performance. He's struggling to get the ball. When he throws back-to-back deep balls and overthrows them, I feel like there's something wrong. So he obviously wasn't his normal self at the end of the season, and I think he's got a very difficult decision to make. And I also think the whole Denver thing is kind of interesting when you're firing your entire coaching staff with the record they had. It really it gives me pause as to where we're going right now.
Maybe in an entirely new direction with the franchise, and maybe it'll be with a new quarterback. Mike Mayock, we certainly look forward to chatting with you as we get closer and closer to the draft. Thanks, my friend.
I appreciate it, guys.
This has been the Best of Mike and Mike on ESPN Radio Pod Center. To hear more from Mike and Mike, log on to ESPNradio.com and become an ESPN Radio Insider.
The Best of Mike and Mike.
Why do we snack? Hunger? Taste? Because we have nothing better to do? Well, people who snack on almonds not only have something better to do, they're doing it. Almonds are heart health for those with heart. Packed with energy to keep up with anyone. It's that one-of-a-kind crunch that promises to keep you in the game for a long time to come. California almonds. Crunch on.